Thanks for joining me. I'm coming live to you again from Adelaide, where the state is literally on the eve of its election tomorrow. And this comes, of course, as the federal government is figuratively on the eve of delivering a budget in 10 days' time and then pretty soon afterwards calling an election federally. I reckon that'll be on May the 14th, but it could be a week earlier or a week later. So what are the lessons for Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese out of the South Australian election campaign? What will they be looking for in the result? Well, the polls point to a strong victory for Labor. I'll have a sneak preview of the latest news poll towards the end of the program, but these polls so far have been very good for Labor, so that Labor would condemn the Liberals to being a one-term government in South Australia after Labor had the previous 16 years in this state. But even if the polls are wrong and the swing is lower and the Liberals somehow manage to cling to one or two of the 4 or 5 key marginal seats and Stephen Marshall can cobble together some sort of a minority government, the lessons are still going to be the same here. Because based on the economic fundamentals, based on budget management, economic growth, reduced power and water prices, new infrastructure and attracting new investments and jobs, you'd think Marshall ought to be cruising to an easy re-election victory. So what's gone wrong? Well, firstly, disunity and factional shenanigans in the Liberal Party. Conservatives have been alienated, some have quit the party. The Liberal moderates have run a sort of winner-takes-all dynamic in South Australia, and this, together with some members getting caught up in travel rorts and other controversies, well, this has pushed the party into minority government. It's looked shambolic. But second, there's no product differentiation from Labor on climate, on energy, education, and even on the economy. The Liberals have governed like Labor light. South Australia is still ridiculously reliant on renewable energy and therefore highly dependent on energy transmission lines from interstate, so it can bring in coal-fired electricity from New South Wales and Victoria when the wind isn't blowing. Now, thankfully, there's another one of those transmission lines in place now, so the next time one shorts out, they might not have a statewide blackout. But like Scott Morrison, the South Australian Liberals have essentially adopted the same reckless renewable energy strategy as Labor, and those chickens will come home to roost for all of us before too long. And on the pandemic, the South Australian Premier failed to lead. He placed his nutty Professor Chief Health Officer and his Police Commissioner in charge, standing back and basking in their glory as they, like to say, kept South Australians safe. Now, they all talked up the fear and the paranoia, making themselves look great for keeping the virus out, for keeping people safe. So that now, though, with the virus coming in, as was always inevitable, some people are cranky, and Marshall is left carrying the can. His tough measures have angered the hospitality industry and small business people, but the fear he helped to generate means the worrywarts are blaming him for letting the virus in. It's a lose-lose situation. Apart from all this, Marshall is up against an exceptional Labor candidate. Peter Malinauskas is genuinely of the right faction, an articulate Labor leader who demonstrates strong family values and has always argued for aspirational policies. It's difficult for the Liberals to portray him as a risk to the state economy, even though his team is pretty ordinary. Anthony Albanese has already learned this main lesson from Malinauskas, hasn't he? That to win, Labor needs a leader who is mainstream, not a socialist left factional warrior. That's why ALBO has had a physical and political makeover. He's disavowing his life in the socialist left and pretending to be a mainstream, even conservative Labor leader. The question is whether pretense can work. It's much better, of course, to be authentic, as Peter Malinauskas is. But then again, Kevin Rudd got elected pretending to be an economic conservative. The bigger lessons from South Australia are for Scott Morrison. By spending so much during the pandemic and building up unprecedented debt levels, the normal contrast between the Coalition and Labor on the economy has been weakened federally. And as I said, he's surrendered the strong differentiation he used to have on climate and energy too. How smart would the Coalition look now if it had held out against the net zero push, with the whole world now seemingly worried about energy security? Morrison is running out of time to develop the crucial battleground areas with Labor. One is national security. It's easy and important to portray Labor and Albanese as a risk on national security. But the Prime Minister needs to get his line and length right on the pandemic too. He needs to be firmly in favour of opening up, not agreeing with premiers who have locked down their populations unnecessarily and thrown up hard borders for far too long. He has other options too. Scott Morrison should do more to eradicate the woke and self-loathing agenda from our school curriculums and universities. That's a fight worth having. And on energy, he should get started on developing a domestic nuclear power industry. If we want to cut emissions and have an economy, it's inevitable that we're going to end up with nuclear power. Morrison should not waste another day. The reason the Marshall government is at risk of losing government after just one term is that it's not fighting for anything. In politics, if you're not fighting for anything, you are a sitting duck. It's time for Scott Morrison to start fighting.